The 7 words my daughter-in-law used to erase me still echo in my ears. She's just the nanny, not family. She said it with a laugh, in the middle of a party, right in front of our neighbours and friends. My own son, Mark, stood just a few feet away and did nothing. He just looked down at his shoes like he was ashamed of me. The little group of parents standing nearby went quiet, their smiles frozen on their faces as they stared at me. Friend, before I go on, let me ask you, would you do me a kindness? Tap subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from. It helps me see just how far my story reaches. Thank you. In that moment, I felt like the whole world was looking at me, but I had never been more invisible. My heart, which had beat only for my family for 62 years, felt like it had stopped cold in my chest. All the years of love, the sacrifices, the endless devotion. Did any of it matter? I had poured my entire life into my son, and his wife Jessica just wiped it all away with a flick of her tongue. My mind was screaming, but not a sound came out. What do you do when your own family points at you and tells the world you don't belong? To understand the pain, you have to understand what came before it. Just an hour earlier, that backyard was my kingdom of love. I was the one who woke up at dawn to bake the dinosaur cake for my grandson, Leo, because I knew he loved the ones with the blue frosting. I spent all morning hanging streamers from the old oak tree and blowing up what felt like 100 balloons until I was dizzy. My back ached and my hands were stained with food colouring, but my heart was full. I was doing it all for him, for my family. When the guests started to arrive, my daughter-in-law, Jessica, floated around the yard in a beautiful white dress, acting as the perfect hostess. She'd offer someone a brownie I baked and say, "Oh, I just whipped these up this morning." She smiled and took all the credit, and I didn't mind. I was happy to be the quiet engine that made their perfect life run. I saw the pride in my son Mark's eyes as he watched her, and I thought that was enough for me. That's when a kind-looking woman walked over to me by the drink table. She smiled and opened her mouth to ask a simple question, a question that would wind up burning my whole world down. The woman's name was Sarah, and she just asked a simple thing. "And how are you related to the family?" she said, her voice so friendly. I opened my mouth to say, "I'm the proud grandmother," but before I could, Jessica swooped in. She put a hand on my arm, and her painted nails felt like tiny claws digging into my skin. Her smile was as bright and cold as a winter sun. She didn't even look at me. She looked right at Sarah, and then she laughed, a sound like ice cracking in a glass, and said those 7 words. "Oh, this is Carol. She's just the nanny, not family." The words hung in the air, thick and ugly. Sarah's friendly face froze. The laughter from the other parents nearby just stopped. I could feel their eyes on me, full of pity. I desperately looked for my son Mark, praying he would step in, that he would say, "Jessica, that's my mother you're talking about." But he didn't. He just took a sudden interest in a patch of grass by the fence. He left me standing there, completely and utterly alone. They thought they had broken me, but they had no idea what they had just woken up. The party ended with fake smiles and waves goodbye. As soon as we were in the car, the silence was so heavy I could feel it pressing on my chest. My grandson, Leo, was thankfully asleep in his car seat, so he didn't have to feel the coldness between us. My daughter-in-law, Jessica, didn't even look at me. She just pulled out her phone, and the little blue light of the screen lit up her face as she smiled at whatever she was looking at. It was like I wasn't even there. My son, Mark, gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles were white. He drove for 10 minutes before he finally whispered, "I'm sorry about that, Mum." His voice was weak, full of shame. Jessica didn't even look up from her phone. "Oh, stop it, Mark," she snapped. "She's a grown woman. She's fine." I wasn't fine. I was breaking apart on the inside, but I didn't cry. I just stared out the window at the dark houses passing by, and I learned a very important lesson. The person who says the cruel words is the enemy. but the person who lets them say it is the betrayer. When we got home, I walked straight to my room and shut the door. The quiet click of the lock echoed in the silent hallway. They thought the fight was over. But in the quiet of my little room, it was just beginning. I sat on the edge of my bed, Jessica's words ringing in my ears. Just the nanny. I looked around the room at the pictures on my dresser. Pictures of my late husband, David, his arm always around me. He never made me feel small. He always called me his queen. The hurt in my chest was so big it was hard to breathe, but then a different feeling started to bubble up underneath it. Anger. A cold, quiet anger that felt like steel settling in my bones. I knelt and pulled a dusty old lockbox from under my bed. I hadn't opened it since David passed away. My hands trembled a little as I turned the key. Inside, sitting right on top, was the deed to this very house. My house. I ran my fingers over the paper, a legal document that proved I was more than just the help. I was the owner. Holding it felt like holding a shield. It was cold, hard proof. But underneath it was something else, something I had almost forgotten about. A thick envelope with my name, Carol, written in my dear David's steady handwriting. What was so important that he had to tell me after he was gone? My heart hammered against my ribs as I slid my finger under the seal and opened the letter. The first few lines were full of love, telling me how much he cherished our life together. Tears welled in my eyes, but I kept reading. Then the tone of the letter changed. David wrote, "My love, I know our son, Mark, has a good heart, but he can be easily led. I have made sure you will always be protected." He explained that the house was, of course, mine and mine alone. But then came the part that made me gasp. He had set up a large separate trust fund for me years ago. The rules were very specific. I could only gain control of it if I could ever prove that I was being formally disrespected or made to feel unwelcome by Mark's chosen partner. My husband, a lawyer to the very end, had seen a future I never could. Jessica's very public cruelty, her 7 little words, were the key. She hadn't just insulted me. She had just made me a very wealthy, independent woman. She thought her words had made me small. She had no idea they had just handed me a sword. The next morning, I did not wake up at 5 a.m. to put on the coffee. I slept until 7, and when I came downstairs, I was already dressed for the day, not in my usual worn-out robe. I walked right past the dirty dishes in the sink and poured myself a cup of coffee from the pot my son, Mark, had clearly made in a rush. I sat down at the kitchen table and opened a magazine, feeling the sun on my face. It felt like the first real breath I'd taken in years. A few minutes later, my daughter-in-law, Jessica, came down looking annoyed. "Carol, Leo needs his breakfast. He's hungry," she said, "not even a good morning." I took a slow sip of my coffee and looked up at her. I gave her a calm, small smile. "Of course," I said, my voice even. "My nanny duties for the day begin in 1 hour at 8 o'clock. The look on her face was worth more than gold. Her mouth opened, then closed. It was a look of pure confusion, like a computer that had just been given a command it didn't understand. She expected me to jump up and start cracking eggs. She didn't expect me to be calm, to be in control. She just stared at me, and I stared right back. What was she going to do? Fire me? Jessica didn't fight back with yelling. She was smarter than that. She started a quiet war. Later that day, she said to Mark, making sure I could hear her from the living room, "Mark, honey, your mother forgot to switch the laundry over again. The clothes are all going to smell." Her voice was syrupy sweet, pretending to be concerned. But I knew what she was doing. She was planting seeds, trying to make me look old and useless. Forgetful. It kept happening. "Carol, did you forget to buy milk at the store?" she'd ask, holding up an empty carton that I knew was full that morning. She'd move my keys and then say with a sigh, "Oh, Mum, you're always misplacing things." She was building a case against me, piece by piece. She wanted to turn my son against me, not by being a monster, but by making me look like a confused old woman who couldn't be trusted. I didn't say anything back. I just watched her, and I remembered what my dear David's letter said. I needed proof. And every time Jessica lied, she was just helping me build my case. She thought she was being clever, but was she clever enough to realize I was now listening in a whole new way? The first crack in their perfect world appeared a few nights later. I was in my room reading when I heard their voices rising from the kitchen. They were trying to whisper, but their anger made them loud. It wasn't about me this time, it was about money. "Jessica, we can't afford this," my son Mark hissed. "Another $500 at that boutique. The credit card is maxed out." "It's for my brand, Mark," she whispered back, her voice sharp and defensive. "I need to look successful to be successful. You said you supported my new career." I heard Mark sigh, a sound so full of exhaustion it made my heart ache for the boy he used to be. "I do, but we're draining our savings. My dad's inheritance won't last forever." I froze, sitting on my bed in the dark. My savings, my husband's money. They were burning through it like it was their own personal piggy bank. All of Jessica's beautiful clothes, the expensive parties, the perfect life, it was all a show, paid for with my husband's hard work. I suddenly realized that their problem wasn't me. Their problem was much, much bigger, and I wondered what else were they hiding. My suspicion became a little splinter in my mind that I couldn't get out. I started paying closer attention, and one afternoon I found my proof. The mailman handed me a stack of letters, and one of them felt different. It was a thick, glossy envelope addressed to Jessica from a fancy credit card company I'd never heard of. I know I shouldn't have, but my hands were shaking as I opened it. The number at the bottom of the page made me feel sick to my stomach. She owed thousands and thousands of dollars. The list of charges was for places I couldn't even imagine: designer boutiques, fancy spas, hotels in the city. I remembered what she'd said about her brand. With a pounding heart, I went to the old desktop computer in the den and typed her name into the search bar. There she was, a secret social media page with thousands of followers. It was filled with pictures of her posing in my house, calling it hers. She was wearing my late husband's watch, calling it a vintage gift. She stood in my garden writing about her quiet country estate. It wasn't just my home she was living in. It was my life she was stealing, one picture at a time. And I had a terrible feeling my son had no idea how deep the lies truly ran. I had to tell my son. I had to protect him. I waited until the next morning when he was in the kitchen alone, getting his coffee before work. I tried to be gentle. "Mark, honey," I started, my voice soft. "I'm worried about you and Jessica. I think you might be in some trouble with money." He didn't even turn around from the counter. His shoulders just tensed up. "What are you talking about, Mum?" he asked, his voice cold. I pushed on. "I saw a bill, Mark. A big one. This influencer thing, I don't think it's making money. I think it's costing you everything." He finally turned to face me, and his eyes were full of anger, not worry. "You went through our mail. Mum, this is Jessica's career, you don't understand it. She's building a business. I need you to stay out of it." He said it with such finality, such dismissal. He wasn't protecting his wife, he was defending a fantasy. He chose her lies over my love. In that moment, I realized I wasn't just fighting for my home anymore. I was fighting completely and utterly on my own. Or so I thought. A few days later, I was sitting on the front porch, feeling lower than I ever had in my life. I was watching the cars go by when a woman walking her dog paused at the end of my driveway. It was Sarah, the neighbour from the party, the one with the kind eyes. She gave me a hesitant little wave. "Hello," she called out. "I hope you don't mind me saying so, but I've been thinking about you. What I saw at that party, well, it just didn't sit right with me." My throat felt tight. It was the first time anyone had acknowledged what had happened. She walked up the path and sat on the step below me. We talked for a few minutes about gardens and the weather, and then she got a serious look on her face. "My name is Sarah," she said again, "and I'm a paralegal." The word hung in the air between us. It sounded like a lifeline. She looked me right in the eye and said, "If you ever need someone to talk to or to look over any documents, my door is always open." And for the first time in a long time, I felt a tiny flicker of something I thought was gone forever. Hope. Could I really trust a stranger with my whole life? I looked at Sarah, this near stranger sitting on my porch, and I made a choice. I took a deep breath and said, "Yes, I could use someone to talk to." I invited her inside, and my hands shook as I poured us both a cup of coffee. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where my family had shared 1,000 meals, and I laid out the whole ugly story. Then I went to my room and returned with the two things that mattered most: the deed to the house and my dear husband David's letter. Sarah read the letter in silence. I watched her eyes scan the page, and when she got to the part about the trust fund, she let out a low whistle. She looked up at me, not with pity, but with a fire in her eyes. "Carol, do you understand what this is?" she asked, her voice low and serious. "This isn't just a letter, it's a legal masterpiece. Your husband built you a fortress." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "But right now it's our secret. She thinks you're a weak old woman. We need to let her think that, while we gather everything we need to prove who she really is. Are you ready for that?" For the first time in so long, I knew I was. My first mission felt like something out of a spy movie. The next day I went to the local electronics store and bought a small security camera, the kind people use to watch their pets. My heart was pounding the whole time. Back at home, while Jessica and my son Mark were out, I placed it on the corner of the living room mantel, half hidden behind a picture of my grandson, Leo. It was a perfect, silent witness to everything that happened in that room. When they got home, I put on my best frail, worried act. "I was reading about some break-ins in the neighbourhood," I said, my voice a little shaky. "Since I'm here alone with Leo so much, I thought a little camera would give us all some peace of mind." Mark nodded right away. "That's a smart idea, Mum." But Jessica's face went pale, then red with anger. "A camera? In my living room?" she hissed, forgetting to keep up her sweet act. "What are you trying to do, spy on us?" Her voice was filled with venom, her face a mask of fury. She had no idea that her angry rant was the first official exhibit in the case I was building against her. The little red recording light just kept blinking. The camera made Jessica nervous. She started taking her phone calls out in the yard or in her car, but a few days later she got careless. She was in the kitchen, her back to me, talking on the phone in a low, hushed voice. I was in the laundry room just off the kitchen, folding towels, and I froze when I heard her words. "I'm telling you, it's the only way," she whispered into her phone. "We just need to get his mother to a different doctor, someone who will listen when we tell them how confused and forgetful she's getting." There was a pause, and then she said the words that made my blood run cold. "Once we have power of attorney, we can manage her finances, make decisions about her care, and secure the house." Power of attorney. I knew what that meant. It meant she could take everything. It meant she could put me in a home and sell my house right out from under me. They weren't just trying to push me out anymore. They were trying to steal my name, my mind, my very life. But the most terrifying part was what she said next. "Don't worry, Mark is on board. He just needs a little push." The words I'd overheard haunted me. Mark is on board. Was my son a victim in all of this, or was he a willing partner? I had to know. The chance came a few nights later. Mark was watching TV and left his tablet on the coffee table when he went outside to take out the trash. My heart was a traitor, beating so fast I thought he'd hear it through the window. My hands shook as I picked it up. I told myself I was doing it to protect myself, but it felt like a betrayal. It took me less than a minute to find the messages between him and his wife, Jessica. What I read broke something inside of me that can never be fixed. "We have to do something about her," Jessica had written. And my son, my Mark, had written back, "I know. She's becoming a financial burden. This power of attorney idea is the only way to control her and protect our future." He complained that I was always here and that he was tired of me treating him like a kid. The woman who called me the nanny was my enemy. But the boy I raised, the one who held my hand as he learned to walk, he was my betrayer, and that was a wound I wasn't sure could ever heal. The pain from Mark's betrayal was a cold, heavy stone in my chest, but as the days passed, it began to change. The sadness got harder, sharper. It turned into a quiet, calculated resolve. If my own son was a wolf in sheep's clothing, then I would have to become a lion. I couldn't trust him, so I would have to outsmart him. I waited for the right moment, a few nights later at the dinner table. The silence between the three of us was as thick as mud. I took a bite of my mashed potatoes and said, as if the thought just popped into my head, "Oh, that reminds me, I had a lovely chat with a financial advisor today." I saw Jessica's fork stop halfway to her mouth. Mark looked up at me. "He was an old friend of your father's," I continued, looking right at a spot on the wall. "We were just going over David's estate, making sure everything is in order. It's all so complicated, you know. All those trusts and special clauses he put in place." They exchanged a look across the table, a tiny, frightened glance they thought I didn't see. But I saw it. Oh, I saw everything. Let them wonder. Let them worry about what my husband had hidden away. My little seed of doubt grew even faster than I expected. Later that night, there was a soft knock on my bedroom door. It was my son, Mark, and he had arranged his face to look worried and sad. He came in and sat on the edge of my bed, just like he used to when he was a little boy with a scraped knee. "Mum," he said, his voice low and serious. "You were right. I've been thinking, and Jessica's spending. It's out of control. I feel so trapped." He looked at me with those big brown eyes that I used to adore, and he lied right to my face. A week ago, I would have pulled him into a hug and promised to help. But now, I saw the truth. He wasn't worried about me. He was worried about the special clauses I had mentioned. He was terrified that Jessica's spending would eat up the inheritance he thought was his. He wasn't trying to save me. He was trying to save his money from his own wife. He was playing both of us. And in that moment I knew my son wasn't just a follower. He was a player in his own dangerous game. Knowing my own son was playing a game against me changed everything. I felt a strange kind of calm settle over me. The lines were drawn. I knew who the enemy was. A few days later, Jessica made her next big move. She came into the living room where I was reading, her phone pressed to her ear and gave me that fake sweet smile. "Carol, I was just on the phone with your brother, John," she said, her voice dripping with phony concern. "We were just saying how it's been too long since we've all seen each other. We're all a bit worried about you, so we're going to have a little family meeting here on Saturday to chat about your care." The words "your care" were meant to sound kind, but they felt like a threat. She was bringing in my own family to build her case against me, to have witnesses for her lies. I played my part perfectly. I looked up from my book and gave her a slightly confused smile. "Oh, that's nice of you to arrange, dear." She smiled back, thinking she had just set the perfect trap. She had no idea I was going to walk into it willingly, not as the lamb she thought I was, but as the bait for a trap of my very own. The first thing I did was walk next door and knock on Sarah's door. We sat in her quiet kitchen, away from the ears and eyes in my own house, and I told her about the family meeting. A grim smile spread across her face. "It's the ambush," she said. "It's happening sooner than I thought. We need to be ready." The next few days were a blur of preparation. We printed out everything. Jessica's shocking credit card bills, screenshots of her fake influencer life, and the horrible emails between her and my son, Mark. Sarah copied the most damning parts of the security camera footage onto a little USB drive. My final move was a phone call to my brother John. "John," I said, my voice steady. "They're going to say a lot of things about me on Saturday. I need you to do something for me. Please don't defend me, don't argue, just listen. But bring your laptop and make sure it can connect to the television." He was confused, but he promised. By the time Saturday morning arrived, I wasn't scared. My folder of evidence sat on my bedside table like a loaded weapon. The guests would be arriving soon for my intervention. I just hoped they were ready. The doorbell rang at 2:00. My brother John and his wife Mary came in, their faces etched with worry. Jessica greeted them with hugs, playing the part of the dutiful daughter-in-law, while my son Mark stood behind her like a shadow. We all sat down in the living room, the same room the little camera was silently watching. The air was thick with unspoken words. Jessica started, her voice soft and full of sorrow. She told them about all the things I'd been forgetting: the milk, the laundry, my keys. She told them I had become paranoid, installing a camera for no reason. She painted a perfect picture of a woman losing her grip, a mother who had become a danger to herself and her own grandson. I could see my brother's face soften with pity. Mary looked like she was about to cry. "To make it all seem real," Mark chimed in, his voice thick with fake emotion. "We're just so worried, Mum." Jessica finished her speech, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "We just feel she's no longer safe on her own," she concluded, looking at John for support. The room was silent. Everyone was looking at me, the poor, confused old woman. It was the perfect performance, and now it was finally my turn to take the stage. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment, letting Jessica's final poisonous words sink in. Then I turned to my brother, my face calm. "John," I said, my voice clear and steady, "would you do me a favor? Please take out your laptop and connect it to the television. I have something I think you all need to see." John looked confused, but he did as I asked, fumbling with the cables behind the TV. Jessica and my son, Mark, exchanged a nervous look. They had no idea what was coming. My brother clicked the file I'd sent him, and suddenly, the big screen lit up with a video from my living room. It was the footage from the day I installed the camera. They all watched my shaky older self explaining why I wanted it for safety. Then they saw the real Jessica. Her face, twisted in rage, appeared on the screen. Her voice, sharp and cruel, filled the room. "A camera? In my living room?" she shrieked. "What are you trying to do, spy on us?" The video continued, capturing every hateful word, including when she called me a useless old hag. The room was dead silent, except for the sound of Jessica's own ugly voice, exposing the truth for everyone to see. While everyone was still frozen in shock, staring at the television, I calmly opened the folder in my lap. "That was just a little glimpse into what my life has become," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "But the reason why she feels that way is much more interesting." I pulled out the first stack of papers and slid them onto the coffee table. "These are Jessica's credit card statements. She and Mark are drowning in debt." Next, I pulled out the glossy printouts of her secret influencer page. "And this is where all the money is going, to fund a fake life, pretending my home and my things are hers." My sister-in-law, Mary, gasped, looking at the pictures. But I saved the worst for last. I took out the printed emails between my son and his wife. "And this," I said, my voice cracking just a little, "is how they plan to solve their money problems." I pushed the papers towards my brother. "Go on, John. Read what my son said about his financial burden of a mother." My brother picked up the pages, and as he read, his face turned from confusion to pure, cold fury. He looked at Mark, and for the first time I saw that my son was truly, deeply afraid. Just as my brother John stood up and took a step toward Mark, the doorbell rang. The sudden chime made everyone jump. I was the only one who wasn't surprised. "I'll get that," I said calmly. I opened the door to find my neighbour Sarah standing there, dressed in a professional blazer and holding a thick legal envelope. I led her into the living room, into the middle of the wreckage of my family. "Everyone," I announced, "this is my neighbour Sarah. She's also been acting as my legal counsel." The word counsel changed the air in the room. This was no longer just a family argument. Sarah stepped forward and handed the thick envelope to Jessica, whose hands were trembling. "Jessica," Sarah said, her voice firm and clear, "you are being served." She didn't wait for a reply. "Our investigation found that 6 months ago you forged your husband's signature on a $50,000 business loan, a loan you secured by illegally using this house, a house you do not own, as collateral. That is a crime. It's called bank fraud." The word fraud landed like a thunderclap. It wasn't about hurt feelings anymore. It was about the police. It was about prison. While Jessica stared at the legal papers in her hand, her face a mask of pure terror, I reached into my folder and pulled out the last 2 documents. The first was my husband David's letter. "You wanted to discuss my care," I said, my voice resonating with a strength I didn't know I possessed. "And I've decided my care is the most important thing to me now." I held up the letter. "My husband foresaw a day I might need protecting. This letter, and the will it's attached to, have activated a trust fund in my name. I am not a burden. In fact, I am a very wealthy and independent woman." Then I pulled out the final piece of paper and placed it gently on the coffee table. It was an official eviction notice. "And my first act of self-care is to remove the poison from my life. Jessica, Mark, your things need to be out of my house in 30 days. I looked at my daughter-in-law. "According to you, I was just the nanny. Well, the nanny's services are no longer required." The eviction notice sat there between us, a simple document that was more powerful than all their lies. The family meeting was over. I had won. The aftermath was swift and brutal. My brother, John, his face dark with a fury I had never seen, stood up and pointed a trembling finger at the door. "Get out," he said to Mark and Jessica, his voice a low growl. "Both of you, get out of her sight right now." My son, Mark, looked completely broken, but Jessica just glared, a cornered animal with nowhere left to run. They shuffled out of the room without another word, the sound of the front door closing sealing their fate. My sister-in-law, Mary, rushed to my side, her arms wrapping around me in a hug that was years overdue. My family, the real one, had come back to me. In the weeks that followed, the perfect life Mark and Jessica had built crumbled to dust. Jessica was buried in meetings with lawyers, trying to avoid prison for the bank fraud. Mark, shamed and abandoned by everyone, lost his job and had to move into his in-laws' basement. The whispers at the grocery store, the looks from old friends, they were all for him now. The quiet in my house was different. It wasn't the cold, heavy silence of before. It was peace. About a month after the meeting, there was a knock on my new front door. I looked through the peephole and saw my son, Mark, standing alone on the porch. He looked different, thinner, tired. The arrogance he always wore was gone, replaced by a deep, hollow sadness. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. We just stood there for a moment in silence. He didn't make excuses or beg for forgiveness. He just held out a small, worn-out bank book. "I got a second job working nights," he said, his voice quiet and hoarse. "I've started paying it back, all the money Jessica spent. It's not much, but it's a start." He pushed the book into my hands. "I can't fix what I broke, Mom. I know that. But I have to start somewhere. I am so sorry." I closed the door, leaving him standing on the porch. The old me would have cried and pulled him inside. The new me knew that forgiveness isn't a gift you just give away. It has to be earned. His apology wasn't an ending. It was just the very first painful step on a long road back. And I had no idea if he would have the strength to walk it. The fight for my house was over, but the battle for my family was not. As part of the legal separation, my son, Mark, was allowed to bring my grandson, Leo, to visit me on Saturdays. I was so nervous that first weekend. I didn't know what they had told him, or if he would be scared of me. He was quiet when he first came in, just looking around the house as if seeing it for the first time. After a few minutes, he came over and handed me a piece of paper. It was a drawing he had made. In it, a smiling stick figure with grey hair, me, was standing next to a small boy. We were in front of a big, bright yellow house, and he had drawn a huge crown above my head. "Daddy told me this is your house, Grandma," he said, his little voice so serious. "He said you are the queen of the house." He looked up at me, his eyes wide and honest. "Is that true?" I nodded, my throat too thick with tears to speak. He then wrapped his little arms around my legs and asked, "Can I stay here with you forever?" In that moment, hugging my grandson, I knew I hadn't been fighting for a building. I had been fighting for him, and I had won. With Leo's love as my foundation, I began to rebuild my life. The first thing to go was all of Jessica's cold, grey furniture that had made my home feel like a sad hotel. I spent a week with my brother John and my friend Sarah, repainting the living room a bright, sunny yellow. We opened all the windows, and for the first time in years, the house was filled with laughter instead of tension. I started cooking again, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I baked pies for my neighbours and tried new recipes just for fun. I called friends I hadn't spoken to in ages and joined a morning walking group at the park. I was no longer just a mother, a widow, or a nanny. I was just Carol. I was rediscovering the woman I had been before my life was consumed by taking care of everyone else. The house felt lighter, and so did I. I would sometimes look at the picture of my dear David on the mantel and smile, knowing he would be proud. I was finally, truly, home. One evening, Sarah came over with a bottle of wine to celebrate my housewarming, as she called it. We sat in my cheerful yellow living room, sipping our wine and watching the sunset through the big window. "You know," she said with a sigh, "you seem like a completely different person from the sad woman I met on that porch a few months ago." I smiled. "I feel like a different person." She took a sip and then looked at me with a curious gleam in her eye. "You're not going to believe this," she said, "but my cousin from Ohio is dealing with a stepson who is trying to sell her family farm right out from under her. She feels so alone and powerless." Sarah leaned forward, her expression serious but hopeful. "After everything you've learned, Carol, after everything you've been through, what would you tell her to do?" I didn't answer right away. I just looked out the window at my beautiful, peaceful garden, took a slow sip of my wine and smiled a knowing, powerful smile. My story was over, but I had a feeling that my work was just beginning.